There was a certain humidity in the air this specific summer evening, a small lull in the constant pouring rain of Gilneas, hovering over a young 14-year-old Genevere like a thick and heavy blanket as she stepped over the damp cobblestones of the merchant's square. In her hands she held a paper bag full of fresh food, clinging onto it as though it was a matter of life or death for her to bring it home. Her inquisitive russet brown eyes were in a constant state of curiously looking around at all the people going about their days. All the critters scurrying or flying, and all the tall buildings and rickety stands of the market. The city was very much alive at this time, right around the height of midday. Geneviève's favourite time to make her way around the streets of Gilneas City, while it was most alive and thriving. She would see the merchant's daughter shoot her slingshot at her older sister, and imagine how fun it might be to shoot bottles with her. She would see the neighbourhood ladies gossip and laugh inside the local cafe, and wish so badly that she had the time to join them. She would admire the older teenagers, most likely doing whatever it was their parents had told them not to do, and think that perhaps she too would one day be brave enough to make that kind of friends and live out her unruly years of young adulthood. All as it were, every time she did her shopping for groceries and everyday items, these thoughts would pass her mind, and every time it would all come down to the same answer and conclusion. One day, but not today. And so she lowered her gaze and let her quick feet scurry out of the city and onto the muddy path towards her home in the woods just outside the rustling city walls. Her damp shoes set up on the porch just as he felt that soft drizzle of rain fall once again. The rotten planks creaked under her step, and when at the entrance she took a moment of silence and serenity before turning the knob and pushing the old wooden door open. The door was stopped halfway by an empty glass bottle on the floor, a clinking noise as she hit it, making her scurry inside to avoid the growing rainfall. The door was shut by her pressing her back against it, and she quickly scanned the room. Her eyes would first land on the bottle by her feet. Whiskey. Empty. She would pick it up and set it aside along with the paper bag of food. Her eyes then wandered to the fireplace on the other side of the living room, barely ablaze any longer, housing but a few glowing pieces of burnt-out wood in a pile of ashes that provided little light or warmth to the cold and dark cabin. By the blue armchair, worn and dirty, a hand peeked out of the armrest. Genevere saw it from where she was standing, and she gulped, taking a few careful strides forward, with her palms brushing over her thick cardigan, her favourite cardigan, that sported a few holes and was quite oversized for her petite frame. After finding the little courage she could muster in her small and frail form, she let out a few wearisome and careful words, a ringing and rough Gilnean accent sounding between the four walls of the rotten cabin they were housed in.
Pa, I'm home. I bought a bunch of carrots. I can make us the carrot soup you like so much.
Her voice faltered and broke. She was quite frankly terrified of the ragged man in the chair, but she didn't want to be. That was her father, and perhaps this day he was in a good mood, she thought. Perhaps today he would be kind. The chair creaked, and the man sat in it groaned. The groan of a hungover gentleman, looking as though he might as well have climbed out of the gutter from outside the pub. Blonde, knotted locks of hair sticking to sweaty and dirty skin. A silhouette that radiated a stench of liquor and smoke, hitting the Gilnean girl like a wall, resulting in her little nose wrinkling and her expression contorting into a discontent grimace. The man didn't look her way, or regard her the way a father should with his daughter. There was nothing affectionate in his demeanour. He was naught but a broken man, and even the most naive of beings could see such. A rumbling and raspy bass voice sounded from him. "Genevere, got a room." A lazy sentence, the words almost flowing together in a drunken murmur.
But Pa, I thought maybe we could have supper together today.
The speech of a careful young woman clinging on to the almost non-existent thin thread of hope that she could get to him still. But she was only met with frustration and aggression. I said, "Go to your room, Genevere. Can't you see I ain't in shape to be spending time with you? I don't want you to see me like this." Each word was spoken shortly and sharply, with an underlying hatred, not for her, but for himself. Though such was not easy for a young teenager to understand. She took it for what it was, and pitied the man.
"But Pa,"
was all she managed to say in a meek voice of pleading desperation before the man towered above her. No warning and no mercy. Rumbling like thunder, he once again raised his voice and left her no choice but to bubble over, letting her tears fall over her pale cheeks. "Genevere Fanshaw, I said I don't want you to see me like this." His statement made it as if though the ceiling was quaking, filling the place with shadows of a dark atmosphere. Genevere wasn't new to this. It was as it always was when he was drinking much like he would proceed to do as he pushed her small frame effortlessly aside so he could pass her and grab a bottle of liquor from the kitchen. A thump and a grunt sounded from her as she landed on her rear over the rotten planks of dark wood, with a sniffle that echoed from her button nose, and soon snot and tears were wiped on the sleeve of her well-worn knitted cardigan. She would plead and repeat herself in between pitiful sobs, to which her father only got more riled up and bitter. The start of a moment in her life that would change everything. She did not know it yet. She held hope in that little but kind heart she housed in her chest. But this was the day that whatever trust this little girl had for her own jolly future would burn to ashes, and she would walk out of the smog as the calloused shell of the child she once was. A bottle of pungent liquid flew over her head to crash against the wall just behind her crouched-up back. He had thrown it towards her and missed her by a hair, and without further warning he kneeled down in front of her. His striking odour and breath hit her again, and his hands of ill intent had latched on to her collar and brought her up in front of him. "I told you I don't want you to see me like this, Genevere. Why don't you ever listen? You were never supposed to see me like this. You were never supposed to see the light of day. She was supposed to, not you." And with those words the man, already broken, shattered even more in the view of his own daughter. Genevere had no choice but to look the man in the eyes, her own being red-shot and frightened, confused and pleading as his sharp and hurtful words were spat onto her face. The words of accusation that she wasn't even supposed to be alive, that rather her mother, who passed in childbirth, should have been, and that it was all her fault. "You can't see me like this." He kept repeating his mantra for the evening, and something was brought forth in her direction. With a horrid switch in his already grim persona, what happened next was too grim for any child to ever have to endure. A chaos that reigned for the most excruciating moments of Geneviève's life. Sure enough, he would make sure Genevere would never see him like that ever again, by the product of a rusty and blunt knife he had unsheathed from his belt. The screams and sobs that escaped her were so harrowing there are no words to describe it. It was a deed of pure and sheer hatred and horror brought upon her that holds no place in a 14-year-old's life. This shadow of a man that was supposed to love and care for her was but halfway done in making sure his words held true when the act came to an end. Amidst a scene of blood and agony, a row of sounds came forth. For that is all she would remember of this day, those sounds. Her eyes were blinded and bloodied. A door slamming, a pair of heavy boots stomping over the creaky floor, the click of a rifle, a thundering gunshot echoing so loudly in her ears, the thud of a body hitting the floor, and finally, the sensation of arms of a kind soul embracing her frail being and carrying her out of harm's way. It was over with, finished, and yet it had only begun. A forest houses much life, even dark ones. No matter the dead trees and murky grounds, there is no exception to that fact. Like the dark forest to which her saviour had brought her to heal. No matter the climate, life always found a way to persevere through any conditions. Through years of adapting and overcoming, even the smallest of creature can thrive in the toughest of circumstances. Even the smallest and most naive or troubled of girls can be given a second chance at life through adapting and overcoming. And through the actions of a helping hand, even those with dark pasts, such as Genevere, are no exception to that. She was rescued that night by the only man she'd come to trust for years after, the only being she'd trust. Bran Fanshaw, her late mother's father, was the one that would bring her up and make sure she had all the knowledge and the tools to persevere through even the toughest of conditions. They never spoke of that night again, and even after his own passing, Genevere would adapt, she would overcome, she would survive. All by the hands of herself, for trust had left her for the majority of her time. All by the guidance and words of her grandfather, for there was not a single other soul that was there for her when she needed a saviour. So he would tell her the words that she half-blindly lives by to this day. Genevere Fanshaw, my love, we take care of the small things, and the big things, they'll take care of themselves.